and good afternoon to all of you. We're live again with another exciting BBA webinar. My name is Shumaila Yousuf, and I will be your host for today. Today we're talking about structural timber and how can structural timber support the development of more sustainable and energy efficient homes and buildings. To discuss this and to answer any questions that you might have, we have with us today Andrew Carpenter from the Structural Timber Association and Morteza Aboutalebi, Chief Engineer at the BBA. Thank you for joining us today. Before I ask Andrew and Morteza to introduce themselves, I would just like to go through a few housekeeping points. This is just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. And so if at a later date you would like to share or watch it with your colleagues, please feel free to share the link once we've uploaded it post the webinar. Also, if you have any questions during the duration time of the webinar, please feel free to send us a question through to the chat feature that has been enabled for you, and our panelists will be happy to answer any questions that you have towards the end of the webinar. Andrew, back to you. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Carpenter. I'm Chief Executive of the Structural Timber Association. It's a position I've held for the last 13 years. Before that, I've been involved in the construction industry for 45 years, all told, always in the supply chain and the manufacturing end. So that's where my experience lies. Currently, I also sit on the Construction Leadership Council Construct Zero board, and we were responsible for identifying the 9 priorities for the UK construction industry to reach net zero by 2050. We launched those at COP26 nearly 2 years ago. And I also sit on the UK government's Timber and Construction Working Group, which I'm going to be talking about shortly, which has identified that if we are to meet net zero by 2050, we need to use more timber in construction. And we're going to be issuing our roadmap in November of this year. So exciting times for the timber sector.
Thank you, Andrew. Morteza, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. Morteza Aboutalebi. I'm the Chief Engineer of the BBA. I have been with the BBA for 8 years now, more than 8 years. And before that, for another 16 years, I have been in the industry and academia in different positions. My background is structural engineering, and I'm a chartered engineer and fellow of IOM3. Looking forward to having a nice presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both of you. That's a much better introduction than I could have ever done of the two of you. So thank you for that. Andrew, I believe you have a presentation to share with us, which I have to share on your behalf. So I will do that. Just bear with me 1 second.
I'm looking forward to asking you to change the slides. It takes me back to those days of COVID-19 when I have to say next slide, please.
Yes,
so,
a lot of that today.
Are you going to put that up as a, because at the moment we can see all the slides coming up. That's the one.
Yep, that is it. Can you see?
Yes.
Yep. Right.
Okay. So would you like me to start now?
Yes, please. Over to you.
Okay. Very good afternoon to you. As I say, I'm Andrew Carpenter, Chief Executive. It's actually the STA, not SAT. I hadn't realised that. No, it's probably my fault, but I've just picked it up now looking at the slide. Anyway, let's move on to the next one quickly. So what I'm going to talk about this afternoon, first of all, just a little bit of knowledge about who we are, what we do as a trade association on behalf of the sector, the benefits of using structural timber frame, which is why there is so much evidence and emphasis on the need to use more timber frame in construction. Most importantly, then I'm going to talk about the government and industry's direction of travel, and then finish up with what we consider to be essential, which links into the work of the BBA, which is our STA Assure program. Thank you. So as a trade association, we've got nearly 1,000 members now. When I took the job on 13 years ago, we had about 200. So I'm not suggesting that I've had anything to do with that, but I would say that it's the the interest in timber in construction that is causing people to join the association. Originally, we were made up of manufacturers, erectors, and designers, but that's broadened quite considerably now. Lots of clients are getting involved, local authorities, housing associations, private developers. And so the membership has grown, which is great from our perspective. We engage widely with government, DLUC, DBT, DEFRA, etc. I gave an example of that in my introduction. I'm working on the government's timbering construction working group, of which more later. And then what we do as a trade association is to support the sector through technical support. In fact, the meeting I attended before coming here was a meeting dealing with several technical issues, and that's our main support really, both for our members but also for the wider industry, because we are seen as the go-to organization when it comes to structural timber frame. Lots of testing, and again there's the link with the BBA. We've just completed some fire testing on cross-laminated timber, CLT, spent about £500,000 on that. We're just about to embark on some more fire testing for traditional timber frame. That'll be £200,000 or £300,000. So not insignificant amounts of money, and that's been the case really ever since I've been in post. You won't be surprised to know that we're also involved in the promotion of timber frame, whether that be to government, stakeholders, clients, and so on. A lot of emphasis on the QA system, the quality assurance schemes, which I'll talk about later. And the elephant in the room really nowadays is around skills and training. There is an increased amount of desire to use more timber in construction. And the questions we're asking, do we have the skills and education and knowledge up and down the supply chain to be able to fulfill that? And part of the work we're doing, which I'll tease out again in the government report I'm going to talk about later, how we're going to try and address that. So the next slide, please. So in terms of who we represent, what you're seeing here is what I call traditional open panel timber frame. We can flick through these. The next one, please. This is closed panel timber frame, where we do more with the system. Next is pre-insulated, where we add insulation. Then the next one is structurally insulated panels, or SIPs, and finally cross-laminated timber, CLT. Now, what I would add, as a trade association, we took the decision a few years ago. Lots of new products and systems coming into the market, but we deliberately chose to stick with panelized systems as a trade association because these have been tried and tested both in the UK and around the world over many years. But at the moment, we don't represent the volumetric or modular side of the sector, and that was a decision that the board took. And you might question, or you might say that what's happened in the last few months, that was a very sensible decision. Okay, the next slide, please. So why are more and more people now looking to off-site solutions, modern methods of construction, different terminology? These are some of the reasons that I've drawn out. Improved health and safety, because it reduces working at height, being carried out on site, so you're in a factory environment. Tighter tolerances that you can achieve in a factory. Reducing, we talked about skills early on, so reducing the man hours on site, less dependency on those site skills, less waste, considerably less waste, and of course less noise and dust, cleaner sites, and so on. So these are the reasons that more and more people now are moving towards off-site solutions. The next slide, please. The quality assurance is key. I'm going to keep coming back to that because it really is something that we build our whole emphasis around is the quality assurance, delivering programs to cost and performance, manufactured in these quality controlled conditions with advanced manufacturing techniques. We incorporate BIM, you won't be surprised to know, into everything we do, taking the designer's model straight through to the factory, and audited by ISO and OHSAS management systems. Thank you. We reckon that on average, these off-site processes can reduce the build process by up to 30% or over 30% in some cases versus traditional build. Dry envelope, very quickly. One of the first questions I asked was why timber frame is used extensively in Scotland. About 80% of all homes in Scotland are built in timber frame. And if you look at the second to final bullet point, I was told they needed to get them wind and watertight very quickly. But reduces fit out times, very predictable. So therefore, if you're using this offsite system, you're saving time and money. You're not delayed by the weather with less labour. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, when you think of timber construction, immediately you think of thermal performance. Performs very well, so exceeds building regulation requirements and assures SAP compliance. U values typically range from 0.22 to 0.10. Air tightness down to as low as 0.6 air changes per hour. Systems can be reduce thermal bridging with these thermally modeled junctions that we're seeing, and therefore ideal for passive house, which is being required more and more, if not passive house itself, something as close to in terms of the UK. The next slide, please. Thank you. Now, all these things around quality, you always have to look at the cost model, because if it doesn't stack, it's unlikely to happen. So what the offsite timber frame system can bring you is predictable and reliable build costs, less prone to variable site costs arising from poor workmanship, weather, etc. that we talked about. Lower lifetime costs thanks to the energy efficient structures, which is one of the reasons why, for example, housing associations consider timber frame, because the energy performance of the finished product is better. So therefore their residents are able to afford the energy costs. And also it's lightweight, so it reduces expensive foundations. And this is particularly pertinent when clients want to build upwards on existing buildings. I was in Australia not long ago, seeing a CLT structure 10 stories above a 6-story structure that was already in place. So the fact that it's a lightweight building material is another reason why it's often selected. Next slide, please. Thank you. Some people under the misinterpretation that if you build in timber frame, you're going to get a timber clad building. That isn't the case. Really, what you're doing is you're replacing the structural element. But in terms of the elevation treatments, you can have whatever you want: brick, stone, render, cladding, tile, timber, whatever you want, and whatever is the requirement of the local planning committee, the local vernacular. So broad variety of finishes. In fact, from the street, you wouldn't know it was a timber frame building. Next slide, please. Okay, importantly, what I'd like to talk about now specifically is the direction of travel that the UK government is taking with regard to timbering construction. COP26, difficult to believe, but it happened about 2 years ago in November 2021, happened in Glasgow. I was there as part of the CLC Construct Zero board. And the next month, DEFRA, as chair, launched a government timbering construction working group. Other departments such as, well, it was BAYS at the time, but now it's DESNES and Department for Business and Trade, DLUC, Forestry Commission, all sit on this interdepartmental group. And the one objective, the single objective, is to safely increase the amount of timber used in construction. Now, I'm delighted they took my advice, because I said at the time that I think we're approaching or involved in the two biggest issues of our time in construction. One is the climate crisis, and one following the dreadful Grenfell tragedy is the building safety agenda. And I said to government, you can't have a net zero solution that isn't safe, and you can't have a safety solution that isn't net zero, which is why they put two together. in this working group. And as I say, the one objective is to safely increase the amount of timber used in construction. Why is that important? Well, the government have laid down in law that we need to reach net zero by 2050. There's an acknowledgement in most places that construction is responsible for around 40% of all emissions. So if they don't look at how the construction industry performs, there's no way it's going to meet its net zero requirements. And so looking at the construction industry, obviously, as everyone knows, if you use timber in terms of the carbon agenda, it's the building material of choice. Hence the government's this decision that it needs to increase the amount of timber in construction. So if you look at context, that's what I'm really talking about, that first box. Why is it important? I've just explained that. But we have to look at the blockers. So what are the barriers to using more timber in construction? And that's what we set out to achieve. So what we committed to 2 years ago was looking at the priority areas that the government and industry working together will commit to. In other words, what should we be focused on now? And I'm going to go through those areas in a moment. But also interestingly, and probably very appropriate at the moment, with the possibility of a different flavour government coming up in 12 months. We were also looking at what needs to be explored going forward. In other words, in the future, what are the future requirements for future parliaments, spending cycles and so on. So a really, really rounded group of people taken from not only the timber sector, but also mainstream construction, other stakeholders like the HSE, the RIBA, and of course the government departments. So the next slide then, please. We looked specifically at 6 areas. So 6 areas where we thought there may be barriers to increasing the amount of construction. We did workshops on these, you know, the blue sky thinking workshops with post-it notes and so on. And we boiled down some questions in each sector that needed answering. So the first thing we looked at was timber supply. How could we increase the amount of timber in construction? How could it be met? If we're going to increase it, have we got the raw material? You know, i.e. in the low, medium or high increase scenario, how much more supply would that involve? And could it be realistically met by the British timber industry, and when and why? So if I give you some figures, the sort of figures we're looking at the moment across the UK, about 22% of all houses are built in timber frame. Now that's skewed by the Scottish figure I gave you earlier of 80-odd%. In England, it's 9 or 10%. But the question we're asking is, you know, what would we do in terms of supply if we made that increase? The Climate Change Committee are indicating that their ideal increase would be 80%. They want to see that 80% figure across the UK. As a worst case scenario, they want it to be 40%. That would still mean doubling the amount of timber frame used in 27 years' time. In terms of homegrown timber, that's the desire. The reality is that that won't happen in the short term. If you look at the entire house, about 40% of the timber used in it is homegrown, 60% is imported. The figure for imported structural timber is considerably more than that, probably 80 to 90%. So to get us from a very low figure of homegrown timber, that won't happen in the short term, and government have had to accept that. But to help us along that, there are very good examples of where it's beginning to be used, particularly in Wales and Scotland. We do need to make sure that the whole sector is joined up, but we are working on that. And one of the targets, for example, is to increase the forest cover in UK from 14.5% to 17.5% as a starter for 10. And then we looked at the hardwood market in the short and long term. The government said they'd like more information on this. We've actually said that at the moment the need for hardwood is minimal, and actually as a government they ought to be really concentrating on the softwood if we're going to make some major impacts in terms of percentage increase of timber. The second title that we looked at is around embodied carbon. As you can imagine, this is what we consider to be our unique selling point. So what we're asking is how the industry can understand the specific questions around timber and about the implementation of whole life carbon. So this is an educational need, and we're looking at how best we can put these cases forward. But also as a sector, we know we have to do more in terms of, if you like, design for life, design for reuse, and so on. So that's on our shoulders. Also looking at methodologies, and particularly EPDs, or environmental product declarations. So all very well and good, my members saying, well, we've got the building material of choice, it's carbon friendly, but also asking in that case, how do you go about carrying out your business? Something's happened to my screen. Can you still see me? Yeah, okay, good. Something funny happened to my screen here. So looking at the companies themselves, what are their EPDs? I mentioned earlier about the amount of timber that's brought in from abroad. So we looked at our environmental product declaration, and around 50% actually is around transportation. So we want our members to be open and honest about this when they put their EPDs forward. I would say that the amount of carbon emitted through that transportation fades into insignificance compared to, say, the amount of embodied carbon created when you're making concrete or steel. I ought to put that into perspective. And then we're looking at benchmarks, and there's an acknowledgement that as a sector we need to look at some high quality data, and that's something that we've agreed to undertake on behalf of the government and the sector. We could move on, please. Thank you. Next one, very important, is around building safety. So can we develop a comprehensive list of research questions, therefore find the evidence gaps and agree a priority? That's being undertaken. You won't be surprised to know that in the current form, the testing that needs to be carried out has been carried out, as you would expect. What we are seeing though going forward, particularly with the Future Home Standard, there will be more tests needed. As soon as the Future Home Standard is identified, then we can look at the gap analysis and see what new tests need to be done. A lot of good work happening already. There's an example there, but there's all sorts of fire test results, durability results, and so on that's available within the STA website. Looking at timber demand, what do we need to do to exploit the profile of timber as a potential construction material? We're all victims of habit, creatures of habit, and in England 90% of people that build houses do it with masonry. So we need to change that profile, and it's about promoting the business benefits and promoting and providing a route through for trades to be able to upskill and learn. We're beginning to see, and I talk about this later, but we're beginning to see quite a move in terms of demand. You've got people like Barrett's who bought up one of my members. We've got Taylor Wimpey building a new 45 million factory in Peterborough. So already the major players in the house building community are seeing that timber frame has got to be part of their future, and they're moving in that direction. The likelihood is others will follow. We're also looking at international comparisons. In fact, we don't need to look much further than Scotland. If we go across the northern, across the divide, in Scotland, 80-odd% they use timber frame. So we can just go there and get best practice. Around the world, about 75% of all homes are timber frame. We can go to the States, we can go to Canada, we can go to Europe. So lots of best practice examples that we can draw on. And then we look at cost, because one of the things that's thrown at us is it's more expensive. The truth is it isn't. There was a company called Riley Levitt Bucknell, QSs. They did an independent report about 5 years ago on social housing. They actually found timber frame housing to be 1% cheaper in cost, but 19% quicker in time. So we need to do more work on that cost comparison because the perception is not reality. Next slide, please. Two more to look at. We know that one of the major barriers to using more timber is around the lenders, the insurers, and the warranty providers. So we're looking to provide data to give evidence that actually using timber frame is safe. We're looking to work with the industry and to collaborate. What we've done as the SDA is we've invited an insurance broker from Gallagher's to sit on our board. In fact, I have a board meeting in his office tomorrow in London. So we've gone right in there in the thick of it. We're not shying away from this. We're trying to listen to what their issues are, to listen to the problems, and then alongside them come up with solutions. Again, we're looking for transparency in terms of their policies, clarity of their data. The government are asking this, and then how can we de-risk the portfolio? And again, then taking best practice, what case studies can we take from the insurance sector? They must be doing it okay in Scotland, so can we transport that best practice across the divide into England? And also, and it's happening now, by the way, but also ensuring that the insurers, the funders and so on, understand the sustainability investment requirements. Interestingly, I was speaking to one big client not long ago, who was telling me now that he won't get funding unless there is a sustainability agenda within his brief. So funders now are only releasing money if there is a green agenda attached to it. So we are seeing quite a change. And also that same client told me that for the first time, he builds apartments in London, high rise. He was saying for the first time that young people are now asking about the build process. So young people are interested in the house they're living in, the flat they're living in. Whereas in my day, it was about location, location, location. And then when you got there, kitchen, bathroom, how near was the school? Those are the questions I used to ask, but things seem to be changing, particularly around the environment argument. The last area that we're looking at is competency and skills. And this really is the elephant in the room from my perspective, because if we are going to double the amount of timber frame or even quadruple the amount of timber frame, have we got the supply chain in place that will allow that to happen? And when I say the supply chain, I mean end to end. So the first people we're looking at to work alongside, and I've already had meetings with the RIBA and iStruct to make sure that the professions know how to design in timber frame. That's critically important. And then at the other end, we need to work very closely with the erectors and installers to make sure that they've got the competencies that are needed. We're working with several education establishments, people like Napier University, NMIT, you'll see is mentioned there. That's a group in Hereford, but also several colleges and other universities around the UK to ensure that we can help with that, as well as the professional bodies. And then government are saying they need more data and information on that skills gap, and working with the CITB, we can do that in terms of identifying where the gaps are and then providing solutions. And this will all come out in the roadmap, as I say, which is being launched in November. Okay, next slide, please. Alongside that, I mentioned I sit on the Construction Leadership Council on their Construct Zero board. We launched this performance framework at COP26 in November 21. I'd like to, I won't go through all 9 priorities if you don't mind. I'd just like to highlight 2, which sits nicely with what we're talking about today. Under transportation, we've got 3 priorities. Priority number 2 is to maximize the use of MMC, thereby improving online logistics, reducing waste, and reducing site transportation. So in other words, for example, if you use CLT rather than concrete, you'll probably reduce your lorry loads by about 3/4. And that's the sort of thing that the CLC is driving. And then the other one I'd like to highlight is number 8, which is now the responsibility of the design team, hence us working with architects and engineers, to design out carbon. So in other words, you need to look at things like timber first, have a timber first. Can I use timber? It's not going to be used everywhere. You've got to use the right material. We're not that naive, but look at timber first. Is it suitable? Because by using timber, you're going to design out carbon. So those are the two areas from a timber perspective that we're very pleased to see in the framework. Next slide, please. I've talked about some of these market forces, but if it doesn't stack, these things don't tend to happen. But what we're now seeing is the reality in business terms of these things that we've been talking about. As an example, Homes England, as you probably know, responsible for giving funding to social housing, they're now saying that 55% PMV is required to receive their funds. So that's pre-manufactured value. This is stuff that goes on in the factory. So they are saying that that's what we require in 25% of all our projects. Secondly, people like Persimmon, they've had a company called Space4 as part of their supply chain for years. I mentioned Barrett's earlier. They bought a company called Oregon. They're also building a new factory in the Midlands. Vistry used to be Countryside. They bought a company called West Frame. They've got two other timber frame factories. Taylor Wimpey, I mentioned, building a new one in Peterborough. Carla Homes have just bought Taylor Lane, and so on. So what we're seeing is the major housing developers now buying up timber frame or building timber frame factories. They want it as part of their supply chain. We've got the Future Home Standard, which I mentioned earlier. That's due to come out later this year, and the EPDs. So market forces are dictating the need to look at timber as a building material of choice. Next slide, please. And just finally, which I think is particularly applicable to today, talking with the BBA, is something we call STA Assure. Now, we've had this in place for years, long before the Grenfell disaster. In fact, it's been #1 priority in my 13 years as chief exec, but it's there to inspire confidence, to give clients, stakeholders and the supply chain confidence in terms of using structural timber frame. And it's independently audited. We use an outside auditor to carry this out. Next slide, please. Around it's really centers around competency and compliance. We do it at 3 levels. We look at the people involved to make sure that they've got a right first time philosophy. We look at the processes to make sure that it's right on time, and then the product itself or the system itself to make sure that it's right every time. And as the image shows, we suggest that quality is in our DNA. So as I say, it has been in my 13 years. Next slide, please. And what we look at, first of all, under the people competency, we have something called TIFCAST. That's our timber frame competency assessment scheme, looking at the erectors, installers, NBQs, SBQs. We have apprentice schemes, and in particular, we look at follow-on trades. We mentioned earlier about the lack of timber frame projects in England in particular. So the follow-on trades are incredibly important because many of them will not have dealt with timber frame projects before. So that's something we look at. If we could move on, thank you. Around product, making sure that it's manufactured in factory quality controlled conditions with advanced manufacturing techniques. Using BIM, I mentioned earlier, we use BIM from designers through the factory, and then that they have an audited management process in place. Next slide, please. And finally, process. So you can see, I mentioned this earlier, but ISO, OHSAS. We have something called Site Safe. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and 16 steps. We use design for manufacture, factory right through to site, and then CDM compliance. You won't be surprised with that. It's a requirement. Next slide, please. This is what we carry out when we audit one of our manufacturer members. I won't read these all out, but you can see the type of detail that we go into. And as I say, this is all carried out by an independent assessor. And I hope my friends at BBA will be pleased to see all the detail in here that's covered. As I say, I'm not going to go through the list. You can read that very well from where you are. And next slide, please. We have 3 levels of STA assurance. Now, the fact that you're a bronze member doesn't mean you're any less good than the gold member. It really depends on what marketplace you're operating in. Some clients need more than others. So if you're working for a blue chip company like Barrett's or Argent or something, they're going to want a gold member. If you're working in self-build, you may only need to be bronze. So it really depends of the marketplace in which you operate. But these are the things that we require: the site safe, STA complaints procedure, using competent erectors and installers, because we do have an erector installer scheme as well. We want to make sure that the whole process from design through manufacture to installation is assessed. CE compliance, STA assure third-party assessment. They're common to all three. If you could move on, please. Thank you. Site safe, I wanted to just tease out in particular. We've talked about fire safety through this presentation. This is a program that we developed to ensure the risks of fire during construction is mitigated as much as practicable. And it includes a requirement for all our members to register their site with the local fire brigade. We have an MOU with the Chief Fire Officers Association, and every time one of our members starts a project, it's linked. And so the local fire brigade know that if there is a fire, they know they're going to a timber frame site. We also have something called 16 steps to fire safety. This is now regarded as best practice across the industry. In fact, even those not in timber frame now are using it as a best practice document for best practice on site. Thank you. This is the oh, that's right. Don't worry about that. That was just the 16 steps in diagrammatic fashion. Okay. It doesn't matter. Just move on. Okay. We've reached a formal agreement with the NHBC, who probably represent 3/4 of all the warranty work in housing. And from about 4 years ago, they accepted our silver and gold members as compliant with their certification process for timber structures. So therefore, now I'm not completely au fait with this, but HB 2445, their certificate will not be mandatory, because they accept our gold and silver members in that respect. Also, on the next slide, you'll see we've got similar agreements with LABC. In fact, I was speaking at their conference only last week. Premier Guarantee, Protect, Build Zone, Self Build. So you can see that the warranty providers are beginning to acknowledge the STA Assure, which is great from our point of view, because our fear is that about 85% of all the timber frame members are members of the STA, the big members obviously, but there's a tail of non-members, and we're fearful that they might upset the apple cart for the rest of us if they don't perform in a responsible way. But that's it. Thank you very much for your time. I hope I haven't gone over too much, okay. But I'm sure there's too much. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. That was wonderfully comprehensive presentation. Just going back. That is fine. So now I have my own set of questions to ask you, which I'm very excited about. And my first question is to Morteza. Morteza, what key factors does the BBA test for timber products in order to assess that they demonstrate fitness for purpose?
Thank you. Practically, the BBA is an independent third party for certification of products by assessing and approving the declarations by the certificate holders. The matter is that we do not only cover the performances of the products, we cover assessing from raw materials to manufacturing, design, installation, and also throughout the service life of the product. So all important aspects with regards to the performance of the products and systems would be covered by the BBA certificate. These are categorized into specific basic work requirements. For a good reason, I'm going from top to bottom with those basic work requirements related to timber elements, but The problem I have is that I cannot provide you with a generic response for all different types of timber products. I have to be specific and make examples, because the generic response will take hours to be provided. The important basic work requirement, durability, is divided into several areas. I will not go deep into this one. The reason is that it is not within my expert zone, but we have experts with regards to durability in the BBA. And if there are any specific questions about durability of products, we will be very happy to provide the answers, detailed answers. Air permeability and weather tightness are two other basic work requirements. Condensation risk assessment, which contributes to the durability of the products, and thermal assessment, which is a mandatory requirement in the building regulations, are other basic work requirements. Resistance to sound, and the next very important one is fire assessment. Fire assessment is divided into three areas: reaction to fire, fire resistance, and integrity. And the last one, which I kept last on purpose because it is my expert zone, is a structural assessment. So practically, regarding a structural assessment, there are many different aspects that must be considered. Here I make an example to open the discussion. For SIP panels, which was alluded to in Andrew's well-noted presentation, there are different types of panels, timber panels. Structural timber panels might be insulated or might not include insulations. If they include the insulations, they can be very, very easily misleading in terms of structural performances. There are two main types of insulated panels. In the first type, the insulation does not contribute to the structural performance of the panel. In this case, the panels can easily be designed to Eurocode 5, and therefore the BBA does not require to consider the performances during the assessment. We can easily refer to Eurocode 5, and the thread of responsibility is assigned to the designer of the system, which should be a chartered structural engineer to design the system appropriately. But if the insulation contributes to the structural performance, which creates exactly the same construction with the same elements, but different philosophy of design and different performances assumed or assumptions for performances, requires the BBA to do a very comprehensive assessment of the SIP panels, so-called SIP panels. The SIP panels must be assessed for impact, for creep, for racking resistance, for axial performances, for bending performances, and for shear performances. Based on their applications, they might be required to be assessed for fatigue performances or vibration performances as well. So at the end of the day, if I want to pick up one of these and go deeper into the spectrum, creep performances, we have been very reluctant to certify SIP panels for floor applications because of creep inadequate or inappropriate performances of SIP panels with regards to creep in most scenarios. So the creep test must be elongated for must be continued for approximately 2 years to make sure that the 60 years performance of the SIP panel is fit for purpose. That by itself would require a very lengthy certification process. So based on experience, most of the SIP manufacturers have refrained from using their products in floor applications, although that might be an option depending on fitness for purpose for creep. So if the insulation is contributing to the performance of the panels, that can cause problems with the so-called modification factors in the design to Eurocode 5 for timber structures. So on that basis, the short answer to your question is, what the BBA does is to assess the product in case-by-case assessment of specification, but considering consistency throughout the board for different systems. So at the same time as we consider each product as a case-specific product based on its composition and its applications, but at the same time we have a global consistency between certification, among certification of all products of the type, so that we do not consider products inappropriately. I hope I have answered your question.
You have. I think we're just short on time, so I'll just quickly ask the next question to Andrew. Andrew, in the current regulatory landscape, what challenges do you think are the members of the Structural Timber Association currently facing?
I think probably our main challenge at the moment is around the changes to Part B and the misinterpretations that have been made by surveyors. I think what's happened is that the consultation or the regulations activity really went ahead without too much consultation, and there have been a number of unintended consequences. I think certain surveyors are drawing conclusions that are not necessarily what was intended. So I would say that's probably, in the regulatory landscape, our biggest issue at the moment, right around Part B.
Morteza, do you agree? Your thoughts? Any thoughts on this?
Yes, fire at the moment is at the heart of all concerns and considerations, and it's rightly there. So practically, we should all focus on any risks to the public safety, and fire is the focus at the moment.
I don't disagree with that at all. What I'm saying is that certain surveyors have misinterpreted Part B and are communicating it correctly. That's my point.
Yes. Yeah.
So Andrew, coming back to you, would you be able to briefly outline what the main considerations are for specifiers when they work within timber construction?
Well, really, to be honest with you, I would refer them to our STA Assure system, because this is a process that we make sure our manufacturers adhere to, and that includes design within it. Because, you know, like it's just been said, you know, we're absolutely adamant that we want these systems to be 100% safe. That's why we're doing this work with the RIBA and with iStruct, with this government working group, trying to upskill them. So to be honest with you, most of the designers now that use timber frame on a regular basis are members, and they join the STA to make sure they've got access to all the technical data. We've got everything a designer needs. All they have to do is use it. It's all available on the website.
Morteza, is there anything you would like to add to the question?
Not really. I believe that what the BBA does and what the STA is designated for are completing each other. So on each side of this front, we are trying mutually to enhance the technical performance and technical robustness of the industry in a wider spectrum.
Yeah, I don't see it as competing. I think we're all on the same page. And as I say, the work I do with the Construction Leadership Council, with this government working group, it's all about raising the bar. It's all about making us a safer and more sustainable sector. So we're all on the same page. We all slightly have different positions in the team, if you like, but I think we're all moving in the same direction.
Andrew, the government has set out its policies and proposals for decarbonizing all sectors of the UK economy to meet the net zero target by 2050. In lieu of all of this, how can the timber sector help contribute towards achieving this target?
Well, the main contribution, to be honest, is what I've presented just now, is being part of this timber and construction working group. We've been working with them on the main group and then the 6 subgroups. We've just added, by the way, the first meeting yesterday, we had a meeting of innovation and research and development, which is something that maybe UK construction industry as a whole doesn't do particularly well. But what we've recognized is that the solutions to a lot of the other issues are going to take R&D and innovation. So you could add that in as a 7th. But really, I would say that the best thing we can do is just to carry on with the work of that government working group. And once the roadmap is issued, get ourselves behind it to deliver the solutions.
Morteza, my next question has 2 parts. So the first part would be how can the BBA and the STA mutually support the industry? And the next part I'll ask once here. It's similar. It's basically, what role do you see the BBA to be playing, especially as an enabler of safety within the built environment?
Practically, the BBA is playing a key role in terms of assuring that the products are fit for purpose in terms of safety in different aspects, from structural durability, fire, or other aspects. The matter is that I do agree with Andrew that shoulder to shoulder, all organizations are trying to enhance the industry in terms of technical robustness. We all are responsible to play the right role in our shoes to all together we can guarantee that the users of the industry, which is the whole society, would be safe and would be actually enjoying the service life of the systems. And beyond that, even throughout the recycling or regeneration of the products can be reused and refacilitated. So practically, what the government is looking at with the supports of the likes of STA and the BBA in terms of making the industry green and making it environment friendly by application of more timber structures, by different scopes that are being played and developed. The role of the STA and the role of the BBA is very, very important. So practically on all corners and on all fronts, we are trying our best to implement the regulations in the best way possible. That's the game we are all trying to stick to.
And I think your new technical director coming in soon will help the relationship between the 2 organizations, I would suggest.
I'm looking forward to meeting, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for all the questions. While I have time for just one more question, I'd like to put this question out, Morteza, I believe, if you can, if this might not be your area of expertise, but one of the questions that had come in earlier before was, when testing for products, is there any consideration made for attacks on timber by wood boring insects and also fungal attack? If you can just shed light on.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Is there any?
Is there any consideration made for attacks on timber by wood-boring insects and also fungal attack?
To be honest, it's outside of my area of expertise. I think if I was to give an answer, I'd really be, winging it. So that's something that's more akin. So within the timber sector, we have a number of organisations, three main ones. There's Confor that deal with the forestry. Then there's an organisation called TDUK that actually deals with the supply of timber, which is where I think this question would be best placed. Because by the time it gets to us, we're just putting it into a construction, a system. So we're not really, as an organisation, we don't deal with the raw material. The raw material is the product with which my members operate. So I think if I was to try and give you an answer, I think I'd be winging it, which wouldn't be right. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. That's okay. Morteza, do you have any insights on that at all?
Yes, we consider the requirements of BS 8417 practically for preservation of timber, which practically provides, to some extent, provides assurance for the resistance of these products to attacks and also fungal effects. So practically, this is one aspect of it. The other aspect is these products have been CE marked to BSEN 300 and the rest of the series of 300 odds standards. In each of those standards, there are specifications for timber structures in terms of application so that they are preserved from the attacks and from the effects. So there are two aspects to be looked at in this question. The first aspect is the resistance of the product itself, and the second aspect is preservation from the effects by additional products or additional items to be added to the system. The BBA does consider both of these. So when we assure the product is fit for purpose for a specific service life, we consider all different aspects that would affect the durability of the product in terms of attacks or effects. So the short answer is yes, we do consider that. But to give specific answers for each product, I should know the product composition and I should know the product application. So if any manufacturers would like to discuss this further, they can approach us directly and I can actually refer them to our durability experts.
Fair enough. No, that makes sense. That it's better to look at it at a case-by-case basis than just giving out a generic answer. That's fine. Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just to say that this webinar has been recorded and will be available for you to watch in a few hours. So please keep a lookout, and if there's any questions that you would like to ask even after the webinar's ended, please feel free to send us an email on hello@bbastats.co.uk and we'll get the panelists to answer any questions that you have. Thank you, Morteza. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us, and hope you all have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye.